Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, sports money reporter Justin Birnbaum. Justin, thanks for coming in studio and joining me.
Thanks for having me, Britt.
There is some big news in your neck of the woods, and it's earth-shattering news that rocks the professional golf world. The PGA Tour announced that it was joining forces with LIV Golf and the DP World Tour to form a joint commercial entity. It seems like the golf world really has completely shifted overnight. Can you explain how we arrived at this point?
Absolutely. So LIV Golf, for those who don't know, is a breakaway tour, and it's funded by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. So the idea with LIV Golf was to lure away a number of stars and form a tour that it varies in the rules a little bit differently, but is more star focused, whatever, kind of like, call it the World Series of Golf. They didn't accomplish that in getting all the stars they wanted, but they did lure some pretty substantial names like Dustin Johnson, Phil Mickelson, and it's not the first time someone's tried to do this. I mean, Greg Norman, who's actually LIV's CEO and commissioner, he tried to organize something like this in the 90s and was unsuccessful. And also before there was LIV, there was another group called the PGL that was trying to get this done. And they even had the Saudi funding behind it a little bit as well, but then they ultimately pulled out one with their own idea. So the idea of this breakaway tour competing with the PGA Tour is this thing that has emerged over the last 2 years. And that's kind of where we're at.
So it seems like they're the only successful ones to actually do it. But I do want to take a step back here. Why do the Saudis want to get involved in golf in the first place?
Well, they love golf. And that includes, high-ranking members of the government and members of the royal family, including the Crown Prince. Even before LIV, they've hosted events. But ultimately, Saudi Arabia has been trying to diversify its economy outside of just oil, and they've used sports as a way of getting into that, as well as hospitality and travel as well. But it is a little more complicated than that. Saudi Arabia obviously has a complicated human rights record with, the alleged murder of Washington Post reporter Jamal Khashoggi, and also the alleged connection to 9/11. And 9/11 families have been big protesters of the LIV Tour. So there are many who believe that Saudi Arabia is using sports as a way to kind of clean their reputation in the world and kind of change the narrative. It's complicated. It's hard to say for sure, but ultimately, like the term blood money has been thrown around, and it's a complicated issue.
Justin, another term I've heard that has been used is the term sports washing. And whenever the past year I have seen LIV and PGA in the headlines together, there have been a war of words. They've been criticizing each other. So come to this news of them joining forces, how surprising is this?
Yeah, so the PGA Tour has taken a pretty harsh stance against LIV, and I would say from that perspective alone, it's pretty surprising. With that being said, there were many who believed that this was the eventual outcome. I mean, at the end of the day, LIV was not going away. Even if they couldn't turn substantial revenues right away, they virtually had unlimited funding from the $620 billion in assets under management public investment fund. That was a mouthful there, but the point stands. LIV could keep going as long as they want, and they had the resources to pull stars away and make these great offers. Obviously we reported that Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson both got 9-figure guarantees. There's a number of guys who got 9-figure guarantees that we estimate. And when you can do this, eventually, guys are going to want to chase the money. They're going to want to go away. And, obviously the ones on the tour were able to deal with the reputational risk that came with it and the exposure risk. But yeah, I mean, definitely a mix of surprise, and kind of this had to be the eventual outcome because this was not going away.
Justin, what you're telling me is that LIV seems to be a competitor with bottomless pockets. They weren't going away anytime soon. And the PGA Tour really took a harsh stance against them time and time again over the past year until they teamed up this week. Why would they team up?
So until we see the full details of this deal, I think it's hard to extrapolate every little piece of the motivation, but there is one theme that does stand out more than others, and that's money. Obviously, for the PGA Tour, having their stars or some of their stars play on a competing tour was not the best for business. And, a unified golf world is probably more lucrative for them than a fragmented one. I mean, there were benefits for the players. Obviously the threat of LIV caused the PGA to kind of enhance some of its events and raise prize money and be more proactive about certain things. But also these two sides were pretty deadlocked in an expensive legal battle. And if that had gone on years and years and years, that could have racked up tens of millions of dollars of expenses. So between the legal expenses, between stars being on other tours, between kind of the pressure to kind of read and react based on what the market is saying, I think money played a huge role here. And, we don't know, like I said, it's early. We need to see how the deal works out. But you think that a unified golf world in the long run is going to be one that is more lucrative and more profitable overall.
Justin, earlier in the conversation, you did mention the concerning human rights record that Saudi Arabia does have. Can you give us the full picture here, though? Why has LIV been so harshly criticized?
So that component of it is a key reason, of course. Obviously, there's the alleged murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post reporter, and the alleged connection to 9/11. And that is a pill that is very hard for many people to swallow. And obviously, with this tour emerging and being so directly funded by Saudi Arabia, those criticisms coming up are natural. I will say that whether it's Saudi Arabia or other money coming out of the Middle East, there is a lot of Middle Eastern money flowing into sports. And maybe, it's hard to say. I can't speak for every person out there, but, my estimation is that maybe it's less palatable that this is coming directly and this is a direct instrument of the public investment fund. But, you look at the English Premier League and Newcastle United, which is also owned by the public investment fund, and they've got lots of other, different sports investments going on. So, it is a wide-ranging thing. And it's not necessarily the same level of criticism, though I'm sure it exists in some form. It's hard to say. And, I can't alone speak for everyone. With that being said, on the golf side, LIV offers a variation of the rules. PGA tournaments are usually 4 days, 72 holes, and they cut half the field after 2 days. In LIV, they play 3 days, which is 54 holes, and no one gets cut. So basically everybody gets paid. So that it's a way of kind of like whittling away the competitive edge of the tournament, because if you're going to make money no matter what, why do is there a difference between making 500,000, 800,000 for these guys? Probably not. They're so wealthy. But also, there are other aspects, like they play a shotgun start, which refers to playing all the golfers on the course at the same time, whereas in PGA Tour events, they play the holes 1 through 18 in order. With that being said, the PGA Tour is a long-standing traditional sport. It's got a ton of legacy. It's very tied into the history and has all these stars and a great reputation, in terms of competitiveness. And, it's not just LIV. That's something that's hard to establish in just a year or two. And obviously LIV, with their variations, with the criticisms that came with it, were necessarily struggling to prove that this is a competitive tour and these guys can compete. But ultimately, I think, with what happened at the last major championship with Brooks Koepka, a LIV player, winning it does prove that there is talent on the LIV tour.
When I first heard this deal, my first thought was about Saudi Arabia's shoddy human rights record. My second thought was Tiger Woods, who, he's a billionaire, so he doesn't really need my thoughts, but he did turn down $700 to $800 million to join LIV Golf. Phil Mickelson, on the other hand, signed on for about $200 million. So what does this move mean for golfers like Tiger Woods who didn't defect to LIV?
Yeah, so those who went, and the top tier of those who went, got these large numbers like Phil, 200, and we estimate he got half of that up front. A number of guys got these astronomical payments that are generational wealth for them, and a lot more than what they could earn, whether it's competing or through the endorsement market. But it's hard to say without getting a sense of how everyone feels about what. I know a lot of players on the tour took to social media because they found out on the platform itself, on these platforms themselves, and kind of were shocked and surprised. But, the people I've talked to do expect some discontent to be sowed among this group. Obviously, the LIV players were banned for making this decision, and it does seem that there will be a path for them to come back to the PGA Tour. It's unclear what that path will be or whether that will include any sort of retribution or fines. But ultimately, if you look at the most basic form of it, Phil Mickelson got a $200 million guarantee, and there's a good chance or a likely chance that he'll be able to return to the PGA Tour. So, it seems like a great deal for him. So when you talk about these guys who turned it down and, didn't go and kind of towed the party line, I'm sure it's a tough pill to swallow. Ultimately, there is a lot of money flowing into the sport, and none of the top guys are hurting for cash. But, it's tough. And obviously, there were reports of a players only meeting with PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan, and there was a lot of discontent and unsatisfaction with him. And even there was reports saying that he was called a hypocrite in there. So I think I think it's tough to swallow. I think, we have to see how the players react and what they say and how that goes, and take it from there.
Justin, you mentioned the discontent over players finding out this news on social media, but I really want to know the overall response to this deal and how will this change professional golf going forward?
Yeah, so I think that what I've heard is that unification for professional golf is overall a good thing. I think as to who benefits specifically from what happened is kind of mixed. I mean, obviously the guys on the LIV side, they were banned from the PGA Tour, and this is creating a path for them to return. For those on the PGA Tour, especially the players, I think many were irked about taking such a hard stance against it and towing the party line, and ultimately finding out the news. Like when Colin Morikawa, one of the tour's biggest stars, takes to Twitter and says, wow, it's great finding out news on Twitter. I think that says a lot. And the PGA Tour is supposed to be an apparatus that serves its players. So I think that to a degree is a tough thing to swallow. As for what it means for professional golf, again, it's early. We don't know how the structure of this deal is going to look, or what these entities will look like, or how this joint commercial entity will run. But, Saudi Arabian money is here to stay in professional golf.
Justin, multiple times throughout our conversation, the term sports washing came up. The term blood money came up. We have talked about Saudi Arabia's shoddy human rights record. And I'm curious, LIV is only less than 2 years old. Does this deal legitimize LIV? Does it really show that money talks?
So it's hard to say how things are going to unfold, because we still don't know what the structure of this new apparatus is going to be and what future that has for LIV Golf. Obviously we mentioned that the PIF and Saudi Arabian money will be, much more involved and inside of this joint entity. But ultimately it's hard to say. I mean, at the end of the day, you're right. Money talks, because you can't imagine this deal happening and the PGA Tour changing their stance so harshly without, there being a proven lucrative financial future for it and its players somehow involved. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see. There's going to be a lot to unfold, and I'll be watching the details of this deal closely.
Well, as you watch the details of this deal, I hope you come on and join me and tell the viewers all the details about them. Justin Birnbaum, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany.